Chapter 10: The Riddle of Thebes and the Ash of Troy. In the generations before the great wars that would ultimately sever the gods from the affairs of men, the mortal realm was plagued by the inescapable, suffocating weight of divine prophecy. In the city of Thebes, King Laius received a terrifying warning from his soothsayer. He must never father a child, for any son born to his bloodline was destined to murder him and claim his wife's bed. Yet Laius was utterly overcome by the irresistible beauty of his queen, Jocasta, and in a moment of passion, the fateful child was conceived. Desperate to thwart the cosmos, the king commanded a servant to abandon the newborn boy on a desolate mountainside to die of exposure. But fate could not be unspooled so easily. The infant was discovered by a merciful shepherd and delivered into the childless, welcoming arms of King Polybus and Queen Merope of Corinth, who named the boy Oedipus and raised him as a beloved prince. As Oedipus grew into a formidable young man, dark whispers regarding his true parentage began to haunt the corridors of Corinth. Seeking the absolute truth, Oedipus traveled to the infallible oracle at Delphi, only to be struck by a horrifying revelation. He was cursed to slaughter his father and wed his mother. Believing Polybus and Merope to be his true parents, a distraught Oedipus fled Corinth, plunging blindly toward the city of Thebes in a desperate bid to outrun his destiny. On the narrow, dusty road to Thebes, Oedipus's path was blocked by a self-important dignitary in a carriage who violently demanded the right of way. A furious quarrel erupted in the heat of the sun, and in a flash of lethal rage, Oedipus struck the man down, unknowingly spilling the blood of King Laius, his true father. Continuing his journey, the wandering prince arrived at a city held hostage by the Sphinx, a terrifying monstrosity bearing the face of a woman, the muscular body of a lion, and the vast wings of a bird. The beast barred the gates, demanding the answer to a singular riddle. What goes on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs at noon, and 3 legs in the evening? With a brilliant, piercing intellect, Oedipus answered, "Man. For humanity crawls as an infant, walks upright in the prime of life, and leans upon a wooden stick in the twilight of old age." With the monster defeated, the jubilant citizens of Thebes crowned their savior as the new king, offering him the hand of their beautiful, grieving widow, Queen Jocasta. For years, the royal couple ruled in blissful ignorance, bearing several children, until a devastating plague descended upon the city, rotting the crops and choking the streets with the dead. When all sacrifices failed, the blind prophet Tiresias was summoned to the palace, where he laid bare the gruesome, world-shattering truth. The plague was a miasma born of the king's own abominable sins. Realizing she had shared her bed with her own son, a horrified Jocasta retreated to her chambers and hanged herself. When Oedipus discovered her lifeless body swinging in the shadows, the psychological agony of his fulfilled destiny broke his mind. Seizing the heavy golden pins from his mother-wife's dress, he plunged them violently into his own eyes, blinding himself so he would never again have to look upon the horrors he had wrought. As the curse of Thebes passed into whispered legend, a far greater conflagration was brewing across the Aegean, a conflict that would draw the bloodlines of gods and men into a singular apocalyptic meat grinder. The Trojan War was ignited not by politics, but by the capricious vanity of the divine, when Aphrodite, the goddess of love, offered the handsome Trojan prince Paris the absolute devotion of Helen, the most beautiful woman in the world. Helen, however, was already bound in sacred marriage to King Menelaus of Sparta. Intoxicated by desire, Paris abducted the queen and carried her back to the impenetrable walled stronghold of Troy, located in Asia Minor. A deeply humiliated and furious Menelaus appealed to his brother, Agamemnon, the mighty king of Mycenae, who leveraged his vast wealth and power to amass an unprecedented Greek armada. This legendary alliance included the cunning king Odysseus of Ithaca and the era's most lethal, semi-divine weapon, Achilles. The son of King Peleus and the sea nymph Thetis, Achilles had been submerged in the dark waters of the river Styx as an infant to render his flesh immortal. Because his mother gripped him tightly by his left heel as she dipped him in the underworld's torrent, that single patch of skin remained fatally vulnerable. For 9 agonizing, blood-soaked years, the Greek forces threw themselves against the towering walls of Troy. The drawn-out siege fractured the minds of the men. Plagues ravaged the camps, and mutiny simmered just beneath the surface. The fragile Greek alliance nearly shattered entirely when the arrogant Agamemnon confiscated one of Achilles' prized concubines. Insulted to his very core, the proud warrior refused to lift his sword, withdrawing to his tents while his countrymen were slaughtered. Without their greatest champion, the Greeks were mercilessly driven back toward their ships by a surging Trojan counterattack. Desperate to prevent the fleet from burning, Achilles' beloved companion, Patroclus, begged to borrow the hero's magnificent armor to rally the terrified Greeks. The ruse temporarily turned the tide, but Patroclus was soon isolated and violently struck down by Hector, the noblest and most fearsome of the Trojan princes, who stripped the fallen youth of Achilles' gleaming armor. When the news of Patroclus' death reached the tents, an apocalyptic, world-ending grief consumed Achilles. He erected a towering, smoke-choked funeral pyre for his fallen brother, hosted grim funeral games, and then descended upon the battlefield with the unrestrained, terrifying wrath of a demon. Carving a path of absolute devastation through the Trojan ranks, he finally cornered Hector, butchering the prince in single combat. Denying the royal family the sanctity of a burial, Achilles lashed Hector's mangled corpse to the back of his chariot, dragging it mercilessly through the dust around the walls of Troy. But fate demands a balance in blood. Soon after his brutal triumph, Paris, guided by the unseen hand of Apollo, loosed a poisoned arrow that found its mark perfectly in Achilles' one mortal heel, sending the greatest of all warriors into the dark abyss of Hades. In its 10th grueling year, the deadlock of the war was finally broken, not by divine strength, but by the razor-sharp cunning of Odysseus. The king of Ithaca ordered the construction of a colossal, hollow wooden horse. An elite squad of Greek assassins sealed themselves within the dark, suffocating belly of the beast, while the rest of the vast Greek fleet burned their camps and sailed out of sight, leaving the horse sitting upon the scarred plains. Believing their enemies had surrendered and departed, The jubilant Trojans dragged the massive wooden idol within the city walls as a monument to their victory. That night, as the entire city of Troy surrendered to a drunken, exhausted stupor, the hidden warriors slipped silently from the trapdoor of the horse. They slaughtered the drowsy sentries and threw the great bronze gates wide open, welcoming the returning Greek armada that had crept back to the shoreline under the cloak of darkness. A savage, unmitigated massacre ensued. The majestic city of Troy was burned to its bedrock, the men butchered and the women enslaved. Though Menelaus ultimately reclaimed his stolen queen, the victory was poisoned. In their bloodlust, the Greeks engaged in the wanton destruction of Troy's sacred temples, irreversibly losing the goodwill of the very gods who had allowed them to win.